you. As usual, we have Neris, who is picking up any questions in the Welsh language channel and passing them through to us. And as you can see, the usual kind of agenda, if people have been to this session before, some brief introductions. First part of our session today, we're going to be covering the main landscape review, progress on that in our beta phase. And then we're going to be passing over to look specifically at the work that we're doing around digital inclusion. If we have any questions as we go along, please feel free to add them in the chat bar. We'll pick them up as we go, perhaps, or any others we'll make sure that we answer right at the end. To move on to the first slide, here is what CDPS is here for, which hopefully you're all familiar with by now. Here to support Wales deliver better digital public services in a sustainable way. Move through this. Here's the team. You'll be hearing from Henry, Roshan, Marie, and Eva today, as well as myself, Rick Stark. And then without further ado, I'm going to pass over to the rest of the landscape review to take us through the detail of what we've done since we last spoke.
Thanks, Rick. To anyone who's been to these Chantels before, this is going to be familiar, but our goal is still the same. We want to understand the landscape of Welsh public services, understand the challenges faced, the technology used, and any opportunities to develop and improve. And that's in order to help CDPS, but also other digital leaders across the sector to plan and to prioritize their activities to achieve maximum impact. So we're building that base of evidence to allow digital leaders to make data-driven decisions. So what are we doing concretely in this phase? So we're thinking about two things. The first is how we develop a landscape review to not just provide a snapshot of what the landscape is in this moment in time, but to allow CDPS and others to continuously make data-driven decisions and to understand challenges on an ongoing basis. We're also building on our understanding of opportunities from the alpha to delve deeper into a smaller number of significant challenge areas. So in the alpha, we went broad, we spoke to a lot of different services to identify themes that came up again and again. Now we're trying to go a bit deeper, so understanding the root causes of challenges, how widespread they are, and what we could do to tackle them. We're then going to feed those evidence-backed challenge areas to CDPS and other digital leaders to input into their decision-making. So to get the more granular understanding of challenges, we are going back out and speaking to organizations across the 4 sectors here, so Welsh Government, sponsored bodies, health and care, and local authorities. We've met 4 so far, and we've got more meetings in the diaries over the next few weeks. So a big thank you to everyone who's making the time to speak with us. We really appreciate it. Based on those early findings, so we are at the beginning of our engagement, and we've got a lot more to learn, but we're keen to share our learnings as we go. So the themes that we're going to speak about, we, for the most part, identified in the alpha, but again, just to reiterate, here we're asking more targeted questions and hoping to delve a little bit deeper. The first theme that came out of our early engagement is around recruiting and the difficulty of articulating the value proposition for digital public sector jobs. Without surprise, the most significant factor is pay. So the first quote here is from an organization who managed to build the skills in-house, but found that once a digital team got that experience, they tend to go elsewhere for better pay. That's something that we've heard again and again. A kind of mitigating factor for that we have heard about as well is remote work, which gives individuals more flexibility, which is an incentive in itself, but also widens the talent pool. And so the last quote here on this slide is an organization who's managed to turn that challenge around through remote applications. Throughout this work, we're keen to keep going and keep identifying best practice and sharing lessons learned where we can. And so that's something that we're interested in pursuing further, particularly around recruiting. The second theme that came out quite strongly was around Once for Wales services, so services which are developed or procured for organizations across the country. So we kept hearing about mixed feelings about Once for Wales. Organizations do recognize the benefits. That's better value for money for the sector. It's a more joined up experience for users. But they also acknowledge the reality of it, which was that organizations end up with systems that they wouldn't necessarily have procured for themselves. The first quote here is from an organization that felt that way, felt a bit stuck with Once for Wales services, saying our hands are tied. The bottom quote here is a bit of a worst case scenario where an organization had a solution that was procured on an all Wales basis, but found that that solution didn't pass their cybersecurity assessment, and they would have preferred to go with a separate option, but ended up stuck with something they weren't happy with. Something else that we've heard around Once for Wales services is that after past issues with these, for example, with Wikis, we found a lack of or loss of confidence around these solutions. And the second quote here shows that with certain wariness from teams and from organizations to work on common services and common platforms in the future. And that's something that we're really keen to keep in mind as we think about how we could tackle these common challenges that we hear about. I'm now going to pass over to Roshan to talk about case management.
Thanks, Marie. Unfortunately, my audio is not working, but if you guys can hear me, then I will carry on. Okay, great. So one of the challenges which we've heard about from both local authorities and in the health and care sector, both in the previous alpha phase and now in the beta, concerns case management, or how different services are using different tools and techniques to manage customers and activities. So just to briefly explain what case management actually is, it involves the work, so the recording, monitoring, and analysis involved in processing data, procedures, and related content that comprise a case. So a case can be an investigation that must be conducted, a service request that needs to be fulfilled, or maybe an incident or issue that needs to be resolved. And so the challenges we're seeing are particularly around integration with the back office, as with that first quote on the screen. So essentially, if there's full integration between the front end systems that users, such as residents in a local authority area, use and the back end for internal staff, then when information is recorded, for example, if a user was to explain a story to someone working in the local authority, they wouldn't have to go through that same process with another staff member at another time, or they wouldn't have to fill in the same form multiple times. The right people would effectively be able to access their information at the right time, and they would be able to keep track of the progress of their case. In the health and care setting, we've heard specifically about case management in the context of the Wikis system. So essentially, as Wikis potentially doesn't have certain elements of functionality, staff members are actually having to enter data twice, both into the Wikis and the Welsh PASIC system. So the limitation of the system is obviously adding duplication of work and is taking away valuable time for staff. So this is a challenge specifically for health boards at the moment. On a more positive note, we've also heard in our conversations about an in-house case management tracking system being piloted by a local authority for their report a streetlight problem service. So this has the full integration, which I mentioned before, and we've been told that even though it's a very new service, it's delivering exactly what customers want. So not only can they report a problem with their streetlight digitally, but also keep track of the progress. They're notified when the case gets given to an engineer or when the repair has to be outsourced. They're given a time frame for it to be fixed, and then a notification when it's resolved. So the system is clearly saving up lots of valuable time for staff members, but also making the experience for citizens a lot better. So yeah, we're really interested to hear a bit more about case management and the challenges that are being faced, but also really, really great kind of ideas and best practice coming out as we're having these conversations. Another area that we've heard about is related to the procurement of certain digital solutions in local authorities especially, and how these are funded. So with the shift towards cloud in more recent years, a number of new challenges are arising. Firstly, we've heard that the contract procedure rules, which local authorities have to adhere to, are actually quite rigid and not necessarily the most conducive to procuring cloud licensing specifically. However, we have been told that organizations are sort of understanding that they need to just adapt. And so now they're trying to figure out how can they do something that's more flexible and cloud-based, yet still obviously follow the rules. So we're really keen to explore that question further and find out how we can potentially help organizations in their procurement efforts on that front. Another aspect to the cloud-based licenses is the way that these are funded. So we've heard from some that the shift from traditional in-house data centers, where everything would usually be allocated to capital budgets, to cloud, which is all now per user and considered operating expenditure, is particularly challenging. And this is because it's in the past, there's maybe been more scope to receive capital funding, whereas it's been a bit trickier in terms of revenue budgets as those have changed year on year. And similarly, as these are per license or user, this means that there can actually be significant variation in the costs over the year as the numbers change based on demand for services. So as local authorities might have been used to perhaps a bit more stability in their costs for this area, and that has helped their financial planning, we're keen to hear more about how they are finding this challenge, and better yet, how they're overcoming it going forwards as more and more move to the cloud. So yeah, keen to hear more about that in this phase. Great. And the kind of final bit of our findings that we'd like to talk about concerns the user account landscape. So we've also been doing desk research alongside our conversations with digital leaders from local authorities and health boards. We've been looking at the websites and the digital service offerings from different local authorities, and based on the public information that they've published, we've been building up the view of different suppliers and solutions being used in Wales for user accounts. So the example here relates to one of the key challenges being faced, which is around services not being connected up to user account functionality, even though both internally and to citizens, they would really benefit from this being done. So simply speaking, there are lots of services, for example, pay your council tax, which would benefit from being accessible via a user account, so that you could, as a resident, get a notification that you need to pay, you log in, quickly pay with your pre-saved payment details, and then have a clear record, which you could always come back to. And that would be in one place with other council services you might be accessing. So we've taken a look at the current providers of these systems across the local authorities. And so, as you might be able to see from the graph, although we weren't able to find this information for 4 of the local authorities just yet, the remaining data shows that iTouch Vision is potentially the most common solution being used, followed by Capita and Granicus, whereas only 1 or 2 councils are currently using GWAS Interactive or have developed their own in-house solutions. It's also helpful to note that 4 councils so far we've noted don't seem to have a unified user account, which might indicate that actually there's some real challenge being experienced on their journey to achieve this, or it could mean something about alternative strategic intentions. So we're really, really keen to speak to more of the councils about this so we can understand this challenge area and the landscape in more detail, and potentially find some opportunities where CDPS might be able to help councils on their journey. Great, so that brings us to the end of the landscape review section of the show and tell, but we're keen to have any questions based on what we've said so far, if there are any.
There's nothing coming up in the channel so far, so perhaps let's move on to the next section now. If any questions come up, obviously on the main landscape review, as you look at Aoife's next presentation, I'm very happy to come back.
Great, thanks, Rick. So I just wanted to recap the project goal. I'm sure many of you have heard it before from the past landscape show and tell, but just we're doing a single directory that covers what people are doing to support digital inclusion across Wales. So that's anything within the past 2 years and anything that might be planned for the future as well. And once we gather that data, we're going to be doing a bit of analysis to understand whether there are any geographic or demographic trends across Wales and perhaps highlight any gaps that there might be. So in terms of what we've done since last time, we were invited to present our work at the Digital Inclusion Skills Programme Board. So thank you for having us along to that. I believe our survey that we had created last time had been sent out through a couple of networks via that board. And it was really interesting to engage with others to understand what they're doing across Wales in terms of supporting digital inclusion. We've also continued our one-to-one conversations with different organisations, trying to understand in a bit more detail about what they're doing. So in the past 2 weeks, we spoke to Age Cymru Difford, also Swansea University and business in the community, and gained a real understanding of what they're doing. We've also increased our international research. So we spoke to the policy lead for the Connecting Scotland programme. That's the main programme that supports digital inclusion in Scotland. And this morning, we also had a great conversation with the digital inclusion lead for Northern Ireland. So I just wanted to share a bit of our learning so far. So last time we shared a bit of insight about the data that we'd collected so far. This time I'm going to focus a bit on sort of our learnings from the international research. So just to put in a bit of context, I'm sure most people know this already, and Wales is slightly behind the rest of the UK in terms of essential digital skills for life and work. So that's 73% for Wales. I believe the UK average is around 81%. But the Lloyd's Essential Digital Skills sort of research report had found that age still has the biggest correlation to having that foundation level for essential digital skills. So 28% of those 75 plus had those skills, whereas 97% of 18 to 24-year-olds have that skill. Wales has the biggest population, the highest proportion of those who are age 65 plus and 85 plus within the UK. So that could be an explanation as to why Wales is slightly behind that essential digital skill level. So in terms of the Connecting Scotland programme, this is a bit of insight from our conversation on Friday. So this is Scotland's main programme to support digital inclusion. It's sort of parallel to the Digital Communities Wales programme that we have in Wales. So far it was set up in April 2020, very quickly in response to the pandemic. They have invested £48 million and have helped 60,000 individuals to get online through this programme. At the moment, there's in sort of a strategy focus to see how they can keep this going in the future, but the government have pledged a further 200 million to the programme, and by the end of the next Scottish Parliament, they want to get 300,000 people online. So the programme is slightly different to Digital Communities Wales in that it actually sends devices directly to individuals. So Digital Communities Wales works with organisations to upskill their staff, their volunteers, and they can pass on those skills to end users. Digital Communities Wales also does a kit loan to those organisations so that they can use with those citizens as well. And the Connecting Scotland programme is slightly different because organisations apply to the programme on behalf of an individual who must be of low income. Now, there's no actual set criteria for that, but they trust the organisations that that individual is. Then they apply for a device, and then that device is provided along with internet connection and training through a digital champions network. So the programme has focused on different groups in the past 2 years. So they've had different phases, such as focusing on those from families and care leavers. I think their most recent one was employability. So that's a little bit different, whereas Digital Communities Wales, I don't believe, has a criteria for anyone to get access to that support. In terms of broadband, so this is very similar to what we found out Wales was doing. We spoke with Adam Butcher yesterday from his policy lead on broadband in Wales. Scotland have a R100 programme, so they are committing to providing super fast broadband to every home and business in Scotland. However, I don't believe there is a time frame at the moment for that. So they're achieving this through the R100 contracts, the voucher scheme, so where your home might not be part of, it might not be part of the scheme to have broadband rolled out. you can apply for a voucher and ask a provider to build the network to your home. And that's very similar to what Wales is doing as well. And they've also got commercial coverage. And so I'll now pass over to Henry to talk a bit more about what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks.
Thanks, Aoife. Should we go on just as a final wrap up of what we're doing next? So we've got a couple more weeks until we are going to close the survey, at least for this initial phase. So we're really keen, we are going to be continuing to promote the survey, also asking our partners who have sent out the survey if they're able to send reminders in those last couple of weeks. We're really pleased that so far we've had 34 organisations respond to us, but we're hoping that we'll get hopefully more of a trickle as we get to the end as well. Can we go on to the next slide, please? We're then thinking about how we analyse this data and how we use it. We're really keen that the analysis and data preparation that we do is repeatable. So we're keen to set this up in such a way that either our team or other teams that we're working with to continue this digital inclusion review are able to do that really easily and in a repeatable way. There's the date there for when the survey is closing, so it's 25th of March is what we're working towards, within a couple of weeks to analyse that data once we've got it in. Finally, then continuing what Aoife was talking about around Scotland and Northern Ireland, who we met today. We're meeting with DCMS at the end of this week to understand a bit more about how England is approaching digital inclusion. And we're hoping to bring that together as a bit of a clearer comparison about how the four nations have approached this problem, either in similar ways or in different ways. And that is the end of our presentation today. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. We'd really welcome any questions around either the landscape review or the digital inclusion review. So feel free to raise your hand or to put any questions in the chat. Otherwise, we are available via email and via our website, and do feel free to get in touch afterwards as well. But I'll pause now and see if there's any questions.
So I think I'm not seeing any immediate questions here. As always, you can contact the team via the email that we showed on the last slide. This session and recording will go out on YouTube. And so you can view and share that with your colleagues there if necessary. We'd love to hear from anybody with any questions, any suggested contacts in particular for the digital inclusion work, gratefully received. And I just note I had a Slack message from Rhiannon within CDPS offering some more contacts there, so that's really good to see. But I think as there are no more questions coming up in the chat, just remains to say thank you very much, everyone, for attending this morning, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much.
Thanks all.